Welcome to another sew along. Today we are going to be doing an add-on. It's called the tiered add-on, and what it is it's a supplement to some of our Children's Corner patterns. Actually 3: the Kaki for a knit, the Harper for a 24-month or younger, and then also the Victoria for any age. And the tiered is a tiered skirt. So these will be the instructions that go with one of those 3 patterns. So if you want to make a knit, you would use the Kaki, and then if you do a woven, it would either be the Harper or the Victoria. We've done other add-ons. We've done the Robert Skort, which was a skirt intended to be sewn to the Robert shorts. And then we've also done the scallop add-on, which were really sweet scallop collars and scallop bands for sleeves. And there were several of the new Children's Corner patterns that those will work with. So I hope you enjoy this. This turns out very, very sweet. You will need the PDF, and this is only in a PDF, and so you'll need to print off your pattern pieces and your instructions and gather your fabric, and we'll be back to get started. Okay, now that you've got your patterns printed and taped together, the next thing you'll do is cut out your tiers. You'll have 2 for each section, 2 for the top, 2 for the middle, and 2 for the bottom, unless you're making a size 6 or larger, and then you'll have 3 for the bottom. So after you've cut them out, go ahead and mark the center of each tier at both the top and the bottom of the tier, and then you'll sew them together to make a circle and finish those seams. You'll do that with each tier, and then you're going to put gathering threads in the top of each tier. Now, I didn't have a direction to my fabric, so I didn't have to worry about it, but if you have a direction to your fabric, you need to pay close attention that you are actually stitching at the top of each tier. And I have found that especially for knits, it seems like if I will use a smaller stitch length, a shorter stitch length than you might normally use for gathering threads, that your gathers don't slip around as much. It just seems like sometimes the presser foot wants to push the gathers out and make flat spots in your ruffle or whatever you're gathering. So I actually only used a stitch length of 3.5, and I really do like it much better because you can just tell that the gathers are much tighter. It takes a little more effort to move them. They still gather fine, but it just takes a little more effort, and your presser foot isn't as likely to push them flat as you're sewing. So just a little tip I think you should try. So after you've got your gathering threads in, then you are going to gather your middle tier so that it matches your top tier. And once you do that, then you're going to put right sides together. Matching the side seams, and then the center seam or center marks that you've put on your tier. So once you get that pinned on and all your gathers distributed, then go ahead and stitch that. This is a 1/2 inch seam, so when you're putting your gathering threads in, they're going to be more like a little more than 1/4 and a little more than 1/2, so that then you can stitch in between your 2 gathering threads. After you've stitched, then go ahead and finish that seam by trimming it and zigzagging it or using your serger, and then we will be ready for the next step. Now I'm ready to sew the bottom tier on the middle tier, and I've got it all gathered up, And for those of you that are making a size 5 or smaller, you'll be matching the seams of your tiers with each side seam of the tier that's the center tier. If you are making a 6 or larger, then you're not going to be able to match both seams at the seams on your last tier because there are 3 seams. So one thing you could do is you could actually match one seam, and then just knowing that you're not going to have a seam matching at the other side, and your marks that you've placed on your tier, your center marks for each section, those are still going to come in handy because you can use those to help gauge how tightly you're gathering your ruffle, how much length you need for each of those half sections of your 3 strips. So get those gathered on and that seam finished with a serger or zigzag, and then go ahead and get your khaki pattern out, and you'll just need the bodice front and back and the armbands and the neck bands. If you'll get that out and get all of that cut, we'll be ready for the next step. Okay, we're ready to get started on our khaki bodice. So you'll have a front and a back, your necklines and your armbands. Mark the center front at the neckline and at the bottom of the bodice at the waistline. And on the front, there is another dot up here along the neckline, and you need to mark that. That's important when we are putting the neckband on. And then the back, you just need to mark like the front, the center at the neckline and the center at the waistline. And then your neckband, you need to press that under. You can kind of tell I've pressed it under because it does leave a crease even though it flops back open. But when you sew this on and have to turn that, you'll have a crease there and it'll make it much easier. So the first thing you're going to do is sew your neckband in a circle and press that open. And then you're going to, with right sides together, sew the shoulder seams of the bodice. And those seams need to be finished with a serger or a zigzag. So let's do that, and then we'll be back for the next step. Now, before we stitch the neckband on, here is the seam. So right here will be the center front, and then fold it in half again so that you can mark the quarter marks. Now, to stitch the neckband on the bodice, put the right side of the neckband to the wrong side of the bodice, and in the back you'll match the seam in the neckband with that center back dot that you put on there. And then the quarter mark on your neckband will go with the dot on your neckline. And the quarter mark with the center front. And then again, the quarter mark with the dot. So now the neckband is a little bit smaller than the neckline, so you will need to stretch just a little bit as you sew. So you'll stretch like that and stitch that at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And while we're doing that, let's just go ahead and do the armholes too. So they are done the same way. So you press one long edge, 1/4 inch. And then you'll be sewing these in a circle, just like you did the neckband. Stitch them, press that seam allowance open, turn them right side out, and I'm going to go ahead and sew the neckband on, and we actually sew the armbands on, or the armhole bands, the same way, but I'll talk you through it a little bit more before we actually do those. I'm going to sew the neckband on, and then I'll show you the next step of this. Okay, so I've got my neckband on, and I have brought the folded edge, or the edge that had the crease on it, now to the right side, and it will go just past the stitching line that you'll see right there where you stitch the neckband on. So the next step will be edge stitching, just top stitching right along there. And since I'm going to use my edge stitch foot, I'm going to wait and do that when I do my armhole bands too. So before you do your side seam, the instructions suggest that maybe you would want to do a stay stitch at the bottom of the bodice, and you can do that, and that will keep it from stretching. But also, I like to just put a 1-inch strip of baby interfacing, the fusible lightweight baby interfacing, and that also keeps it from stretching. It stays on there, but it keeps your bodice from stretching, which is what you don't want. And then you'll do the side seams and finish those. And then you will have your armhole bands, and they will go on in the same way as the neckband. So with the right side of the armhole band to the wrong side of the bodice. At the side seam, you're going to match the seam, the side seam with the armhole band seam. And then you'll just keep pinning. And your armhole band will be slightly smaller than the armhole itself, and it's supposed to be. So you'll have to stretch it a little bit. So you're going to do your side seam, your fused interfacing, if you want to do that, your side seams, and finish those. Then you'll be ready to actually stitch your armhole bands on, and they'll be stitched on the same way as the neckband. And then what I'm going to do, this is the reason I wanted to wait till I had the armholes on before I actually do this. I'm going to use an edge stitch foot, and a lot of machines do come with this. And what you do is there's a guide here. This one happens to be metal, but it isn't always. And that will go right up against that folded edge, and then you'll move your needle position a little bit so that you're just barely stitching on the edge, and it just helps you get a neater top stitch. So I'm going to do all of that, and I'll see you back in just a little bit. Okay, I've got my bands stitched down now, and I gathered my the top of my skirt, so I'm ready to attach my skirt to my bodice, and that will be with right sides together. I'll match side seams and then finish that seam. I went ahead and pressed a 1-inch hem. It is a long way around this bottom tier, and this is only a 4. So I can only imagine what the bigger sizes are like. I think I will use a twin needle and top stitch this. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to do that. You can just use a single needle and then top stitch it. So I'm going to finish that up and then I'll see you back in a bit. Wow, what a perfect dress for a hot summer day. I hope you've enjoyed this add-on sew-along. We're looking forward to seeing your creations, and we will see you next time.